So we thought we'd do something slightly different today and do away with PowerPoint slides, give you a rest at the end of the day. And we're going to do this in more of a sort of discussion format. But we are actually going to address some very specific issues which we'll put up on the screen. And each of our panelists will talk to those, and then we'll have a more general discussion. And then some more general points at the end before we turn it over to you for questions. And we are hoping to allow 5 minutes for questions. So we felt this is a really important topic that doesn't always get enough attention. It's really essential that if you're going to maximize your revenue from your rights, that you think beyond just the first use and the purpose for which you're acquiring the rights in the first place, the first publication. And you think beyond to what else can be done with that article, book, monograph, whatever it is, and acquire the correct rights in the first place, and then manage them efficiently and effectively so as to make the most of them. We've got a wealth of expertise in rights management here on the stage, so I'm really delighted to introduce the 3 panelists to you. On my immediate right is Rebecca Cook, who is Senior Manager of Global Sales Partnerships at Wiley, with responsibility for partnerships with third parties who may want to reuse Wiley's content. She does much else besides, but that's her primary responsibility. In the middle, we have Lucy Alexander, who is a rights manager as well, formerly working with a society and now working with individual publishers in rights and business development. And finally, but not least, we have Clare Hodder, who is a rights consultant who may already be well known to many of you, working with RightsZone, and she works with publishers of all sizes on acquisition and licensing issues. So we hope that you will get a good flavor of what rights management is about, why it's so important, and this is just the beginning. We're going to be doing a lot more on rights management in terms of providing advice and guidance from PLS with the support of experts such as my panelists. So we will move straight on to the first issue. And I wanted to ask Rebecca to address this one. What are the opportunities for maximizing your revenue that publishers may be missing out on at the moment?
Sure, thank you, Sarah. So I think a lot of people automatically will think about translation rights when you think rights and licensing. Perhaps some people may think about, audiobooks, that sort of thing. But what I'm responsible for and what our team deal with are increasingly more interesting and diversified ways of capitalising on the rights and the content as publishers that we hold. So we're thinking about permissions to reuse content in small constituent parts, whether that's for marketing, whether that's in wider licensing deals. We're looking at being able to capitalise on blockchain licensing potentially, or licensing content and master AI providers. There's a huge wealth of really interesting ways that people are increasingly wanting to reuse content. And in order, for us to really kind of establish the value of that content, we have to think of it beyond the context in which it's first published. Often the real kind of commercial value is in the constituent parts. It's in the smaller, parts of the content. It's in the way we can curate that and present that to potential licensing partners. So in order for us to kind of get ahead of disruptors in the industry and being able to service customers who are wanting these more interesting content reuses, we have to consider some of the new business models that are beyond just the very straightforward, we'll license you translation rights for a book, or we'll grant you permission to reuse something in one particular fixed media. So we have all of those types of reuses. There's digitization of backlists of content. That's really interesting. Most of the time publishers don't realize, and societies, the real value of that content that's sitting away in dusty cabinets or stored in kind of not very searchable or discoverable systems. We also generate collective licensing revenue from content. All of these things fall under the umbrella of rights and licensing. So it's much more than some of the kind of more static traditional licensing that people immediately associate when they hear those words. The thing is, all of these, reuses, people sometimes think the commercial value is only in health science content. We're increasingly finding that isn't the case. We may get a startup tech company who's wanting to use some psychology content or some other SSH content or finance journal content in an app they're developing. And all of those sorts of reuses fall under this umbrella of rights and licensing. But to enable us to kind of exploit all of this properly, to increase discoverability and to generate revenue, it's all of these reuses are predicated on the fact that we as rights holders are able to have at our fingertips full documentation, proof of ownership and rights information in a searchable system. As a working for a large publisher, you can't expect a tech startup or another potential new partner to come ask you for content and then you spend 2 or 3 months trying to scrabble around to see whether you actually do own that content and can reuse it. So for us, I think the message that I want to kind of put out there is that in order for us to kind of get ahead of some of these disruptors, to be able to service customer needs and to really, capitalise on the value, whether that's financial or otherwise, of the content we publish, we have to have the good foundational baseline that we have good rights management, we know what we own, and we can capitalise on that appropriately.
Before I say something about that, to add to it, is there anything either of you would like to add to what Rebecca said specifically? What I'm thinking is it's also, there are 2 other areas that are important revenue-wise, because if someone comes along and infringes your copyright, unless you've got your rights sorted out, you can't actually protect your rights and therefore protect your investment. But also, some publishers may want to sell their company at one stage or another, and I don't know if you want to say something about that, Rebecca.
Yeah, we've heard kind of anecdotally from others in recent discussions we've had about this, that often, discussions about mergers or acquisition of content can get really quite far down the line, and then suddenly it's discovered that there isn't actually any documentary evidence of the rights held for the books. You may know you published them, or journal articles. You may presume that you got the appropriate rights from the authors when they were published, but unless you actually have a way of being able to prove that when it comes to crunch time, it can have significant implications on your ability to then do what you wish with your content
and realise what you think is the true value of your content
on
sale. Okay, we're going to move on to another issue, which is what do publishers need to do in order to maximise their rights and take full advantage of all these additional revenue opportunities. Lucy, would you like to?
Yes, of course.
Talk to this.
Thank you, Sarah. I guess I come at this much more from the small publisher, perhaps the society point of view, and this is really the moment where I start reaching down the back of the sofa. So actually I'm looking around. I mean, clearly journals, books, ebooks, all of that content we know about, that's fairly obvious, but it's what else is there in your society, in your organisation? Are there infographics? Are there policy documents that would be of use to other people? Are there campaign materials? Public education stuff certainly I've had experience of getting a lot of rights income through those. And podcasts, all kinds of content in all kinds of formats and varieties. And then once you've identified it, is there external materials in that? And do you know what you're actually allowed to do without beyond that first purpose for the external content that you brought in? And so moving to the second stage, so assuming we have reached down the back of the sofa and got everything out, absolutely everything, and identified where it came from, how can we generate some money out of that? So what is allowed with all the content that you've produced and that you've brought in to make that content in the first place? And who in the organisation holds the record of that? Who holds the campaign document materials? Have they actually recorded it properly? So really thinking about making it accessible across the organisation, however big or small, for everyone to understand or to take the same approach to bringing in content so that it could be used in other ways beyond its first purpose. And actually having a central point that isn't one person necessarily, because they may or may not be there at the moment when you need them to tell you, for instance, just exactly what Rebecca said, I guess. And so just really to go away and think about what you have, what you can do with it, and as an organisation, what else could you do it? Who would be interested in this material? As Rebecca said, small startups, not the organisations you're initially aiming at. Are there other uses? Can it be sliced and diced in different ways for sort of other parties to use? And making sure that you have records to make sure that everything that's come in can be used in all the ways you might want to use it for, even if you haven't really thought of them yet, and that's quite complicated, obviously. But just really making it easy for you to quickly access it when you need to know what you can and can't do with your content, and being quite sure that right across the organisation everyone has access to exactly what your content is in case the call comes to them and not you or to different departments. So I think it's really...
So really you're saying anticipate, think ahead
as much as you can
when you're acquiring rights in the first place.
Absolutely, to try and have a sort of organisation-wide approach to what is the purpose of your organisation. Is there a way we can always use things, make sure we have access to use everything we can.
And making sure that those who are acquiring, the editors, link up with those who are doing the licensing.
Yeah, absolutely.
And try and align things. Thank you. Thank you very much. Before we move on, is there anything else anyone would like to add?
I think the only thing I would just kind of agree with is that often publishing houses are, mandated that they must clear for the broadest possible swathe of rights when they acquire content. But in lots of cases, the licensing out part of that same publishing house are very unwilling to grant that. So there can be a real disconnect on the policy level between what a publishing house is acquiring and what they're willing to license. And there needs to be a little bit more flexibility of thought from the licensing outside to make sure that you're aligned, but you're also enabling other people to use the content in the new forms of reuses that we're increasingly seeing.
We need to take sort of a more strategic approach to the whole parcel of licensing and acquisition, make that all join up and make sure that everyone within the organisation is on board with that message and understands what the implications are if you do or don't get the extent of rights that you're going for in order to take advantage of the opportunities that you've seen.
Thank you. So, Claire, what do publishers need to do?
You need to spend some money, which is never a popular thing to say. But I think this is an area that's been so mismanaged over the years. We really are talking about people's rights information being, as these guys said, tucked away in dusty filing cabinets. It's not, it's not out there, it's not at our fingertips, and that's what we need. And the kind of three main areas where I think we need to invest. And the first one is actually in our people. It always strikes me as really odd that despite the fact that our content is absolutely pivotal to our organisations and our businesses, we entrust the management of the rights in that content which allow us or determine what we can or can't do with that content. We delegate that mostly to editorial assistants and production assistants, and we don't give them any training, and we don't give them support in terms of systems or anything else. We don't necessarily loop them into the policy discussions and the strategies. And then worse than that, we quite often, and we as publishers delegate actually the responsibility for rights management to our authors, who have even less reason to understand the intricacies of copyright law and what rights are required for specific purposes that the publisher might have in mind down the line. And I think that's an area where publishers can really start to help both invest in their own people and provide more support to authors. And it is a really complex area, and it's as much have we got the rights, but also can we meet the obligations that come as a result of us using this content. If you've got an open access license and it's non-commercial or non-derivative, is that going to cause you a problem for some future use, and how are you going to manage that? So you do need to really invest in training people, and it's not just editorial or production people that might be at the forefront of those issues, but again, it's all parts of the organisation. As Lucy said, you've got people in marketing, in sales, creating content, and needing to be aware they're also sharing content, and they need to be aware of what the implications of that sharing is and whether that might impact on the obligations that you as an organisation have committed to, and it can quite quickly get knotty. So I think rights literacy needs to be part of our publishing skill set, and it's really not at the moment, so we need to invest in making that happen. And the second area that I think publishers need to invest in is systems. So our content assets are now really quite complex, and the types of use that we want to put our content to is complex as well, and it's really getting beyond the point where that can be managed manually in analogue systems. So we need systems, and we need systems that are going to cover all of our content. We've got this slightly weird situation where we only can deal with content that exists in a distribution system somewhere. If it's out of commerce, we might still own IP in it, but it's invisible to us as an organisation and certainly to any potential market. So we need to pick that up. There are people with very large backlists. I'm sure Wiley have got lots of examples of this with content that's pre-ISSN or ISBN, and that really is kind of dead to the world because if it hasn't got an identifier, nobody knows it exists. So we really need to kind of capture all that kind of invisible content. And we also need to start tracking our rights information at a granular level. As Rebecca was saying, people want bits of content. There's a huge demand for bits. And we only, at the moment, can deliver them content in predefined packages that we have dictated, not they, and they want to be able to choose. They want to be able to slice and dice in different ways. So we need systems that can manage rights at a granular level. And we also need our systems to help us to flag when we're not meeting our obligations, or we might need to relicense content because, again, we actually end up becoming infringers of other people's rights because we have not managed our rights well, and that's not a good place to be in. And again, those systems need to cross the whole organisation so that anybody dealing with content within the organisation can clearly see what can or can't be done, and what obligations need to be met if they do want to use it. And the final area that I think that publishers need to invest in is metadata. I've already said it's complicated, it's time-consuming, it's manual to manage rights at the moment. But systems can only help us if we've got a common language in which to describe the rights that we want to exchange. And we need to be able to have a language that can also express the terms and conditions that are associated with use of that content. So we need really good metadata standards as well to enable our systems to be able to exchange that kind of information automatically. And we can then, if we then start to apply that rights metadata at a granular level and apply granular content identifiers, I think it gets really exciting, because not only does it mean that we're less likely to infringe other people's rights, but it also gives us an opportunity to create a really exciting new marketplace for our content in exactly the way that Rebecca was describing, in terms of being able to slice and dice content. People can, I don't know if any of you remember when we had the Hargreaves review, David Cameron said that there were teenagers in bedrooms wanting to create mashups, but they couldn't because our copyright law was too complicated. If we can figure out our rights metadata, you know, within a few clicks, it should be possible for you to get clearance for the rights that you want to reuse instantaneously, and any payment resulting from that should be able to flow through as well. So, you know, all of these, you know, we've got the Copyright Hub working on trying to solve some of these issues. We've got PLS Clare and RightsLink, you know, automating some licensing, but it all falls over when it comes back to the publisher, because we just don't know what rights we've got in our stuff, and that can't continue. And really, I suppose the, you know, that is one reason why we need to invest. But other than that, you know, as was mentioned earlier, we can't effectively defend against piracy if we don't know what rights we've got. We can't push back on, at the moment, we get accused, there are accusations of market failure, and this is what the people pushing for more and broader copyright exceptions base their case on. And we need to, if we want to be able to trade our content, then we need copyright to underpin that process. And we've seen what happens in areas of the world like Canada, where broad copyright exceptions are introduced, and in the case of Canada, completely decimated the educational publishing market there. So it really, you know, we really need to sort this out for ourselves. At the moment, there's a demand for content, and we can't fulfill it because of this issue. And if we don't take responsibility for sorting that out, then I know that our friends at Amazon, Google, Facebook, big tech, will start finding solutions to that problem without us, and then we'll have a very different marketplace for our content.
Thanks very much, Claire. You've very helpfully moved on to talking about why, you know, good and effective rights management, other reasons why it's so important to us. But the whole business of the threat of copyright exceptions is very much a live issue at the moment. Some of you may have followed the debate in the European Parliament and the vote that we had yesterday, which is now supporting a new copyright directive, but it was in danger of falling over. And I think without good, effective copyright laws, it does pave the way for the big tech companies to come in and take over, or press regulators for yet more exceptions. So it's really important that we manage our rights really efficiently and effectively. We've got these rights, we must make the most of them. And I wondered, Lucy, whether you want to say anything about other benefits that stem from good rights management.
I think I'd like to add to that, actually. It's really, there are quite a lot of benefits for the authors, and so often the authors are also the organisation's members or potential customers. And really, the kinds of things we can do with this good rights management is actually make sure that the authors get the widest possible use for the materials that they've given to us, or signed over to us. But also, we can then control the quality and actually help them to manage the quality and help them to deal with how things are used elsewhere, whether they're sliced and diced or used in small parts, just to make sure that those things are as they intended them to be, and they're going wherever they go, that they're going with all the right acknowledgements and things. But I think there was some discussion earlier in the previous sort of sessions around the reputation of the author and their institution, and with how things are looked after. And actually, it's really important for the authors that the publishers make sure that their reputations are looked after, so that they are, however the content is used, it is used in a way that reflects well on their author and their institution, and can help them in the purpose of what they're publishing about. I think, really. And there's always a possibility of some royalties. I guess that's always a nice bonus. That's not the main thing.
Rebecca, would you like to talk about encouraging people into the industry, maybe?
Sure. So I think there is a real need to make sure that this particular area of publishing is encouraging new talent, that the frame of reference isn't just traditional licensing. It is thinking in more of a startup mentality, or looking at what unmet customer needs are out there and what we can offer. And it's really critical that we have a kind of thriving licensing industry that supports that content and generates that revenue with lots of different perspectives. And we need to kind of reframe how we think about rights and licensing to make sure that new talent and that talent pool is continuing beyond just kind of assistants who kind of come in and are overwhelmed with huge levels of responsibility. I think something I didn't touch upon earlier is this revenue, when it is generated, it's kind of heavy revenue that sinks straight to the bottom line. It's really profitable. It's if you're a small society or smaller publishing house, you think, well, it's not really worth the investment for me. I've not got that much I can gain. For larger publishing houses who have been around for a long time or have huge amounts of content, the task can seem insurmountable. But I think there are real, returns on the investment you can make in investing in these systems, in both the human and human resource capacity, and also in terms of revenue.
So you've all been sitting patiently and listening. I'd like to give the audience a chance to ask any questions. There's a roving mic. If I could just ask you to tell us who you are and then put your question. And we have one right here in the middle.
Hi, I'm Toby Green from the OECD. I'm sorry, I'm going to challenge the title of the session, because it's all about money. And for some of us, it's not just about money. The mission that I have is to maximize the dissemination and readership of our content. And rights is an important part of that. One of the things we do is that we allow anyone to embed any of our content in any website for free. But it's an embed file, and you might think, well, you're giving away a lot of value. Well, actually, because it's an embed file, it still sits on our servers. We can see all the traffic. We know where our stuff has gone. And that is super valuable for us to report back to our funders to say, this content is now appearing on this website, and therefore it's reaching this audience, which is an audience that maybe we can't reach by ourselves. So this is where we're still in control, because it's an embed file. It's the look and feel is our look and feel, because it's an embed file. And we can see exactly what's going on, which, of course, you can't do. If someone takes your PDF file and uploads on a website, you've no idea where it is. So there are clever ways of using technology where you can remain in control and still reach the mission that you have. There's another example, which is also collaboration. And we collaborate with other international organizations where we pool our content onto one platform in order for us to each use our own brands to build a bigger audience collectively for our content. And we do that by pooling our rights. So we basically assign all the rights to a partnership, and through that partnership we share a platform, and we publish together so that each of us can work together collaboratively to build a bigger audience for our content. And that, of course, does help us on the bottom line, because we're a freemium publisher, so we still make money, but we're doing it in a way of pooling rights, but not around selling rights. It's around pooling rights and working collaboratively together. And I think a lot of not-for-profit publishers could do the same, collaboratively working together in their disciplines in order to be able to cut overhead costs, because that's what we do as one of the upsides of what we're doing, as well as also then you reduce your audience acquisition costs in ways that then can benefit your mission.
Thank you, Toby. You actually make a very good point, because it shows how critical rights are. If you've got the rights, you can decide what you want to do with them. You don't have to charge for them. You can give them away for free. You can do exactly the very good things that you've outlined. But everything you've outlined is predicated on having those rights in the first place and having them in good order and knowing that they're yours to make available and they don't belong to other people. So what you say is completely complements, I think, what we've been talking about. Thank you very much. It's the beauty of copyright. You don't have to charge for everything. If you want to give it away, that is your right to do.
Hi, Bob Casher from Inago, and I'm also a member of the Book Industry Study Group's Rights and Permission Subcommittee. So, of course, this is of interest to me because we share your pain. And I'm curious about a couple of things. One is we are in the process of trying to get American publishers to take rights and permission seriously in terms of automating it and in terms of, therefore, identifying what rights they have, what permissions they need, and, you know, in the old maxim, if you don't assert it, you lose it. But we're finding that there's a lot of resistance, and I'm just curious as to what the experience of the members of the panel are. And I'd also like to invite any of you from across the pond to join us in our deliberations. We would love to get more information on some of the pain points you folks are experiencing as well.
Hello.
Well, Claire, do you want to say something?
Yeah, no, well, invitation accepted. The pain is very much felt here as well. It's a really impossible task. You know, I worked in a large publishing company for a long time, trying to kind of bang this drum and saying, you know, we've got this stuff, but we don't know what it is. We can't communicate it. It's really inefficient. It's badly managed. We have people waiting 6 to 12 weeks to get an answer to a permissions request, which might be, it's not our content, you need to go somewhere else. It's just not acceptable to be in that position, but there is resistance. And I think it's because the size of the task looks so enormous. As you said, if you're a large publisher, the thought of having to go through your backlist and work out all the different bits of content that might have different rights owners and kind of codify that and collect metadata on that and then find somewhere to store it, that is a huge task. And if you're a small publisher where your resources are very thinly stretched, you know, that's just another thing to add to the list of things, you know, beyond just getting your content out and satisfying your main objectives. So it is tough, and I think it's not taken seriously enough at senior levels within organisations. I think it's been swept under the carpet. It's not seen as important, but it is important. We will lose our market if we don't sort this out. So we've got to do it. And yes, you know, as many people as we can convert to this message and getting publishers kind of addressing it would be great.
Yeah.